Good morning. Yes, I have many ties to Sacramento. Two cousins are right here, Gary and Gladys. They were born also in Penryn. They moved to Sacramento when the fruit trees were dying and the farms were not good. But it's good to be back in Sacramento. I first got to know Reverend Bob many years ago, and he was just this punk kid from San Francisco. Of course, I was the punk kid from Penryn. And just to begin, I still am a country boy who happens to live in a big city. Was born and raised in Penryn when there were still tree farms, plums and pears in the area. And I remember attending Sunday school, as Dharma school was called back in those days. Back in those days, there was still a Northern Cal district sports league, basketball and baseball. And so to play in the sports teams, you had to go to Sunday school. So obviously, I went to Sunday school. But then I realized I didn't want to be a plum farmer. So I decided, well, I guess I should go to wherever that is, college. So I went to college, went to UC Davis for 3 years. I was on the 5-year plan, so I did the next 2 years at Berkeley before I graduated. And back then, the Institute of Buddhist Studies was a pre-ministerial candidate school. It wasn't a graduate school. So people went to local colleges and took classes part-time at IBS. So I graduated in 1969 and ended up going to Japan for 3 years, got my master's degree from Ryukoku University. Was assigned to Midwest Buddhist Temple in Chicago. I started as the associate minister in August of 1973, and then with the sudden passing of the head minister, Reverend Gyodo Kono, passed away suddenly at the end of 1975, became the resident minister. Then sort of burned out and left the ministry. But in 1981, came back in 2011. But all through that time, regardless of who was the resident minister at Midwest, I was always allowed to take care of the Twin Cities Buddhist Association, which is in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. And it's a Sangha. It doesn't have its own building. But it was a very strong group. But it's also where I learned how things had to change. It was very important for me to have that tie. To go to a strange place where there were so few Buddhists, to understand how to relate and to do things differently. But as Reverend Bob said, most of the time that I was inactive, I worked for the United Airlines, which was very fortunate. And coming back, when I retired United, Reverend Ogui, Bishop Ogui at the time said, "Ron, you want to come back, be minister?" And I said, "No." A month later he calls and says, "Ron, come back as a minister." And I said, "No." A month later he calls again and says, "Ron, come back as a minister." And I say, "Maybe." And he said, then I read the newsletter, Reverend Ron Miyamura is going to be active. I guess you have to say no very clearly. But no, it's been good to be back. Midwest Buddhist Temple is a smaller temple. It's only 250 families, but it's an urban temple in Chicago. It's an urban temple with a parking lot, which is really important in the city. Please come by if you're ever in Chicago, Midwest Buddhist Temple. We have the website. You can always find us. But this morning we're celebrating Bodhi Day. We're observing the real start of Buddhism. It was that day on December 8th that Siddhartha Gautama became discovered enlightenment, became a Buddha. And it's very important, I think, that we remember it was a discovery. It's not something he created. It was already there. He found it. He discovered it. And so he became enlightened, became a Buddha. And so that is, our teaching is from that experience. And it's up to each of us to experience that experience in our own way. Unfortunately, the Buddha's teaching for the rest of his life showed us that there were many ways to experience enlightenment. It wasn't one size fits all. That's why he was called the good doctor. As a doctor prescribes according to the patient. If you're a doctor and you have a broken arm, he fixes it one way. If you're a doctor and you have a stomach ache, he does something else. He prescribes according to the patient. In the same way, the Buddha helped people according to their situation. So he often taught by using stories. And there is a strong tradition of using stories in Buddhism. And of course, what I like to use a lot are stories. And one of my favorite stories I'd like to share with you this morning. It's called A Full Teacup. And in this story, it's a Zen story. There's a lot of good stories that are Zen. I don't know why Shin Buddhism doesn't get better stories. Make some up, Bob. But in this story, it's about a famous Zen temple in Kyoto. And there's a famous priest, large temple. And one of the members was a rich merchant. And he just, gave money to the temple and didn't pay any attention. But as this merchant got older, he decided one day, I want to learn the meaning of life. And so he makes an appointment, 30 minutes with a famous priest. He should be able to tell me the meaning of life in 30 minutes, right? Of course not. But the merchant then thinks, I'm busy, I only have 30 minutes. So on the day he goes, the appointment, he goes to the temple, he's shown to a quiet little room, asked to sit down, and he's asked to wait. The priest will be here shortly, and he waits, and he waits, and he waits, and the priest doesn't come. He's getting agitated. He's getting angry. He runs out into the hallway. Where is that guy? I'm a rich merchant. I'm busy. I don't have time for this. Hurry, have him hurry up. Finally, he calms down. They get him back into the room, and he waits, and he waits, and he gets agitated, and he gets angry. He's just about ready to go out again. And the priest comes in. You could imagine, shaved head, quiet, elderly guy, holding a tray of tea with 2 teacups. Comes in quietly, sits down. The merchant's going ballistic. Where have you been? I donate all this money to you. I'm an important person. Where have you been? How rude of you. And the priest looks up and says, let's have a cup of tea. And so the priest puts the teacup in front of the merchant, who's very agitated, very angry, and he starts to pour the tea. And he pours. The cup fills up, and he pours. And he pours. The cup overflows, making a mess on the table. And the merchant, by this time, is really mad. Look, you stupid old man, don't you see? The cup is full, it's flowing you're making a mess. It's flowing on the table. And the priest looks up quietly and says, you are like the teacup You are so full of yourself, nothing else will go in. End of story. So are we like that merchant? Are we like that teacup that's so full already, nothing goes in? When we come to the temple, we need to be an empty teacup so that we could accept the Dharma, so that we have space for the teachings to come in. But if we're so full of ourselves, think we're so important, and I'm rich and I donate and I give money to the temple and the Sacramento Betsuin is my temple, and if we're so full of ourselves, or can we come every day, every Sunday, every time, as an empty teacup, willing to be filled up, willing to accept the Dharma. And that is hopefully the way we come and to understand, to accept the Dharma. For one, I'd like to close with a personal story. It's a story that is a true story, but also starts from a Dharma talk that I gave many years ago at my home temple in Penryn, in Placer Buddhist Church. It starts with, it was Gotai in May. Reverend Miyamura had invited me to speak, and I remember speaking, and what I talked about that morning was not to procrastinate, not to put things off. And I used the example of witnessing, being at when someone had passed away, it was a older Nisei gentleman, second generation Japanese American, who had a stroke, and he was taken care of at home for 4 or 5 years. It was very difficult. And he passed away at home, and the family gathered. And as the body, we did the Makura Gil, the service at the pillow service, and as the mortuary was taking the body away on a gurney coming through the apartment, the son was grabbing onto the body and crying and said, he never said he loved me. He never said he loved me. And he followed the body, out the apartment, down the stairs. And it was a story, a true story about not forgetting, not putting off what to say, what you need to do, what you need to say today. And it was, and I am a cigarette, I still smoke cigarettes. After service that day, went out to the back door, and Reverend Nishimura and my father I happened to be out there. And my father looks up at me and says, Ron, I love you. What? Did I hear that right? My dad told me that? He's a typical second generation Japanese American, Nisei, very unemotional. I've never heard that before. He never said that. And then that day, I remember Reverend Nishimura and my dad went to Reno, Hawaii to help up there, and my mother took me to the airport. And I flew back to Chicago, and the next day on Monday, I get a phone call that my dad had a heart attack. He was out in his little 5-acre pear orchard, peach orchard. He had turned off the tractor, put his head down, and my mother, looking for him for dinner, found him. And and then 2 hours later, I get a call back, he didn't make it. And come back for a funeral and all that. But I look back and I'm saying, I'm the luckiest son alive. I'm the luckiest son alive. I heard those words from my father, and I will remember my father because that's the last thing he really said to me. And he didn't put off, when I think about it, he didn't put off what he needed to do that day. I really don't know, but I don't think he thought he was not going to see me again. But he made the effort, he had enough sense to tell me. And I look back, and it was just one of those things that, it's really unbelievable, really, but it happened to me. So it is a reminder, again, not to put things off, to do what you need to do today, to tell the people close to you, that you love them, that you care about them. For the parents to tell your children, for your children to tell your parents. So when things like that happen, I know it happens for a reason. I look back, it just happened that Reverend Miyamura invited me back to speak. The environment was just right, I guess. The most surprising thing to me, though, was my dad actually listened to what I talked about. And you often wonder if things happened, beyond our control, happened for a reason. So if we can remember to be that empty teacup, to be willing to listen, to accept, to be filled with the Dharma, and to not put off the things that we need to do today, to do them today. And with that, I hope we can listen to the Dharma more carefully every time. Thank you.